Hello casters, and welcome to this beginner's guide to the Thunder element in Elestrals. Today I'm going to break down all of the runes Thunder has access to, as well as the best Elestrals you can be playing. I'll also touch on the pros and cons of playing Thunder currently in the metagame, as well as discussing their current best builds. There's going to be a guide just like this for every element in Elestrals, so if you find this video helpful, make sure you check out my other ones. But for now, let's shed some light on Thunder. Starting off with the Divine, Stadium, and Artifact runes then, Thunder's Divine rune is Zeus, and honestly, it's probably the best one in the game. When you enchant Zeus, you can enchant up to 3 lightning to it, and then you can choose to disenchant 1 lightning from this Zeus in order to target an opponent's Elestral and give it -3 attack and defense until the end phase. That means that with the help of this Zeus, many of your single spirit Elestrals will be able to get over opposing single spirit Elestrals and possibly even contest some Ascensions as well in the game. Divine runes inherently also provide a means of getting extra spirits into play aggressively, so sometimes we can use these divine runes just to give ourselves an option to Nexus in our deck. Zeus and Demeter, the Earth divine rune, actually have very similar effects. The reason why Zeus, I believe, is stronger than Demeter is that you play better against the likes of Shield of Achilles and Gorgon's Gaze in situations where you have more than one attacking Elestral on your side of the board. That's because you're choosing to minus your opponent rather than buff your own dude. So immediately, one of the key selling points of playing Thunder is that you are using the best divine rune in the game. Every element in Elestrals has access to essentially the same stadium, but for their own type. In this case, Mount Olympus allows us to add 1 attack and 1 defense for each lightning enchanting our Elestrals. The artifact rune Thunder has access to is the Thunderbolt of Zeus. It's a 2 lightning cost artifact which empowers an Elestral, giving them +2 attack. When that Elestral destroys an opponent's Elestral in battle, they must expend 1 spirit. However, if Zeus is enchanted, they must instead expend 2. Whilst Burn is a great strategy to employ against an opponent, the fact that you're up front having to put a couple spirits into play is a big risk of this card, and generally a risk of the majority of artifacts in the game, so it's rare that this one will actually come up. Let's get on to the Invoke Runes that Thunder has access to, and we start with Race to the Top. This card can only be cast if your Mount Olympus, that stadium, is enchanted. Then you target 2 Elestrals and destroy the Elestral with the lowest defense stat. Although this is a fairly situational card, we naturally do play a number of Elestrals that have high defense, and simply because Mount Olympus will be enchanted when we're playing Race to the Top, all of our Thunder Spirits will have that +1 defense added on thanks to our Stadium rune. That means Thunder has access to fantastic Elestral removal inherently. The other Invoke rune Thunder has is Thunderstorm, which target and destroys a rune for 2 Thunder Spirits. This is quite an expensive option in Thunder. Trying to time this card is the big issue, like maybe you can target a single back row rune to allow an attack to go through, or you can see this Thunderstorm when your opponent has their early Divine rune developed. That's when Thunderstorm feels crazy and you actually get the value for the 2 spirits, but there will be many points in the game where it doesn't feel like a great card to play. So in the majority of Thunder decks, it's going to be sort of in and out of the list, oftentimes more so being a sideboard option that you can bring in against other Nexus archetypes which rely heavily on their Divine rune. Because in those cases, Thunderstorm at least goes even in the majority of situations, and sometimes is a plus spirit exchange. Now let's get into some of Thunder's Elestral options, starting with the Nexus and Receive cards. Spark It, which was released in base set, is actually a banned option, and that was Thunder's only single spirit Elestral which has the text Nexus on it. But don't worry, the 2 receivers that you can see on the screen, Astrabbit and Toxion, both have incredible receive effects. Because these receive effects are so strong, we can actually use Omni Nexus options to get multiple uses of these effects. Let's start with Astrabbit, the most infamous Elestral in the game right now. It has that fantastic defensive stat line 2-5. 5 is pretty much the biggest number we see on single spirit Elestrals, and having it in a defense stat makes it even better, because typically your opponent's going to have to need a combination of cards to get through this, unless they're switching your combat position. When Astrabbit receives 1 or more Thunder Spirit, you can look at the top 3 cards of your deck, pick 1, add it to your hand, and shuffle the rest back in. As with any card game, looking deeper into your deck for certain outs that you're trying to piece together, combinations you're looking for, or just fixing what's lacking in your hand is always a fantastic option, making Astrabbit literally the best Elestral in the game that almost every deck will choose to play. However, when you're playing it in a Thunder deck, that means you have extra opportunities to re-enchant the Astrabbit for extra digs into the deck, or cash in on Nexusing cards to once again proc the effect of this Astrabbit, giving you even more card advantage. Toxion is a 4 attack 2 defense Elestral that forces the opponent to expend 1 spirit when the Toxion receives a Thunder Spirit. Toxion has good aggressive stats and immediately hits the board and pays for itself effectively as the opponent is forced to expend, so it's another great receiver option. Onto the other staple Thunder Elestrals that I believe are worth picking up. We'll start on the left hand side with Elechic. It's a 4/1 Thunder Elestral that when normal cast can search the deck for a Divine Rune and add it to your hand. Again, Elechic is well statted aggressively and actually shines best in Thunder because you can immediately grab Zeus, which is a Divine Rune that once again helps you in combat. So an easygoing second play could be cast Elechic, cast Zeus, disenchant from Zeus so Elechic can walk over any other Elestral on the opponent's side of the field. The combination of Astrabbit and Elechic will show up in many archetypes, simply because many archetypes are reliant on their respective Divine Runes. So this is another card that can show up in all sorts of lists. Next up we have Jolton. It's a 4/2 body that when normal cast can search for a Stadium Rune and add it to your hand. Again, another fantastic option here. It's searching the deck for a card and adding it to our hand. Stadium Runes are also really important to helping you win combat once again. Immediately finding a Mount Olympus pushes Jolton to a 5 attack Elestral that can get over many opposing threats. At the same time, we mentioned the Race to the Top Invoke Rune earlier, which requires Mount Olympus to be in play. So Jolton is the card that adds consistency to having the Race to the Top Invoke Rune in your list. Next up we have Boombat. It's just a 2/1 body, but it can disenchant a lightning from itself in order to target and destroy an opponent's Elestral. Usually this Boombat can force things like Gorgon's Gaze, and actually evades a number of other back row options, so it can be a great way to get around higher statted Elestrals. Thunder has access to one of the best healers in the game as well, in Quackle. It's a 2/3 1 spirit cost Elestral that when cast can return 3 Thunder Spirits from the Underworld to your spirit deck. And finally, for the Thunder staples, we have Archetypes. It's a 2 cost Elestral but can be normal cast if the opponent has at least 2 Elestrals in attack position. It's a 6/4 which can immediately get over a number of 1 spirit Elestrals. And when you cast this Archetype, you can enchant up to 3 Thunder from your Underworld to your field. Not only is this a great pseudo healing option, but it's also a great way to ramp up a lot of pressure against an opponent. Immediately pushing your Archetype to a 5 spirit attacker will force the opponent to expend a huge amount. And by the nature of this card's effect, they're going to have Elestrals in attack position, so if they don't have the appropriate back row answers to Archetype, you're going to have a huge swing turn off of this card. There are a couple standout Ascensions that might be worth considering in Thunder, although to be honest they have so many great 1 cost Elestrals that that's going to be the majority of builds. Gryphius is a 1 Thunder 1 Wind Elestral with 5 attack and 3 defense. You can Nexus either 1 Thunder or 1 Wind from a Divine Rune, and when you do, you can special ascend this Gryphius to a Voltempest from your hand or deck. Voltempest is a 2 Thunder 1 Wind Ascension with 13 attack and 10 defense. You can disenchant a Thunder or Wind from this Voltempest to force the opponent to expend 3 spirits, making it a very dangerous burn option. At the same time, whilst Zeus is enchanted, this Voltempest cannot be targeted by opponent's card effects. That means the opponent often has to have a combination of cards to remove this Voltempest, so when it hits the field, it's going to be a big swing for you. The other interesting Ascension Thunder has access to is Sonicor. It's a 2 Thunder Spirit Elestral with 7 attack and 2 defense. The cast of Sonicor cannot be chained by counter runes, which is one of the biggest deals about this card, because you know that the Ascension is going to stick, and whilst this Sonicor is in attack position, players cannot cast counter runes. That means that once again, Sonicor can ascend, be unchallenged, and attack and not be challenged by the opponent's back row. Not only that, but as long as the Sonicor is in attack, your other Thunder Elestrals that are also on the board won't have to worry about walking into back row removal. The main downside of Sonicor is that low 2 defense, so it can be heavily punished by the likes of Cryoblast, or Elestrals which switch combat positions, like Eddy and Mudlet. But on certain boards, a Sonicor will allow you to get through a lot of damage with no response from an opponent. Let's talk about the main archetypes in Thunder. A Nexus Thunder build right now is probably the best deck in the game, where you're going to be using Elechic, Jolton, Astrabbit, and Toxion all in one list. Essentially, they're just a bunch of well-statted dudes that all help thin the deck for you. And with having the great native removal of Race to the Top, you're just a very efficient beatstick of an archetype, especially because you have Zeus to help back you up. And with Nexus options like Ultra of Stars in the deck, you can maintain that hand advantage by re-enchanting your Astrabbit and keeping your Elestrals on the board. Archetype is also very likely to feature in that deck as a great comeback option, as well as a great Elestral to ascend into, and push your advantage even further. The other main option in Thunder right now is splashing in some Wind Elestrals. Toxion has a wind counterpart in Toxis Swarm, which effectively does the same thing but just with wind spirits. Having this gluttony of cards which chip away at your opponents while sticking to well-statted cards is definitely a powerful strategy. And wind has access to Exaltair, which is a very strong Nexus option in its own right, which can continue that theme of burn. The Scorpion build is a little bit less interested in overall value its cards can generate, and more so strictly looking at that spirit differential, with some burning cards and some good healing options in both Wind and Thunder. Let's get on to the pros and cons of Thunder then. And honestly, I think Thunder is just the strongest element in the game right now. Zeus helps you win a lot of early combats, whilst also enabling that Nexus strategy. And you're going to hear this a lot, but Astrabbit is just the best Elestral in the game. So giving yourself extra chances to look at the top 3 and gain more hand advantage is incredible. Many archetypes choose to play 3 copies of Astrabbit and 2 Zaptor in their Spirit deck, just to have that one chance to see an extra card. But the fact that we can get multiple uses out of one Astrabbit is just absolutely phenomenal. That then sort of ties into the next strength of Thunder. It's that Jolton, Elechic, Astrabbit, all of these cards generate hand advantage for us by replacing themselves immediately, and cards like Quackle and Toxion immediately give you spirit advantage. That means you're burning the opponent, staying healthy, or generating a card in hand almost every cast of an Elestral. The only real downsides of Thunder right now is that you are very reliant on that Divine Rune and sometimes the Stadium Runes to an extent as well if you're leaning into Race to the Top. Of course, we have great search for these cards, but Stadium Runes can always be contested, and there are some elements which have fantastic rune removal options. So losing the likes of your Divine or Stadium Runes can shut down your Nexus cards, turning cards like Ultra Stars from one of the best back row options to have to being completely useless. And with no Zeus, all of your reasonably statted Elestrals are no longer getting over everything, whilst other elements have access to stronger combat Elestrals inherently. The other main weakness of the Thunder Elestrals right now is that their balance of stats is much more towards attack value. Aside from Astrabbit, the likes of Jolton, Toxion, and Elechic all have 4 in the attack and 2 or less in defense. So it's very easy for an opponent facing Thunder to tech in Cryoblast from their side deck, or if they're main decking it, just capitalize on your Elestrals. And at the same time, position swapping Elestrals like Eddy and Mudlet, which are just commonplace in main decks and side deck options, immediately come in against Thunder, making your Elestrals overall just far less sticky and vulnerable to destruction. I hope you enjoyed today's video. I'm going to leave a link in the description below to a number of deck lists that I've created in a website called Cube Koga. This is actually built for Pokemon decks, but I've imported all of the relevant cards into one cube. So if you want to look at the full card pool of Elestrals right now that I think is playable, by all means, get reading. And I've got deck lists for a number of the top archetypes in the game right now, including, as you can see, Thunder featuring Arcalyph, as well as Scorpion Windburn, which also has a high focus on Thunder. Hope you enjoyed today's video. Let me know what you thought about it down below. Make sure you check out those other elements, and I'll see you again for another video. Cheers.